Joe Biden has admitted that Israel has committed grave war crimes. Not an exaggeration. This clip I'm going to show you should be treated for what it is. It is a confession of complicity in genocide. Take a listen.
When I went to Israel immediately after their attack by Hamas, 8 days later, whatever it was, and I told him we were going to help. And I said, but Bibi, I said, you can't be carpet bombing these communities. And he said to me, well, you did it. You carpet bombed, not his exact words, but you carpet bombed Berlin. You dropped a nuclear weapon. You killed thousands of innocent people because you had to in order to win a war. I said, that's why we came up with the UN. New deals by which what we would do relative to civilians and military.
So he was comparing 21st century war tactics, battle tactics, with World War II.
Well, what he was really doing is he was going after me for saying you can't indiscriminately bomb civilian areas, even if the bad guys are there. Even if the bad guys there, you can't take out 2, 10, 12, 1,500 people, innocent people, in order to get the one bad guy. And he made a legitimate argument. His perspective said, look, these are the guys that kill my people. These are the guys that are all over in these tunnels. Nobody had any idea the miles of tunnels are down there. It's amazing what they built. And they're sometimes 200 feet under the ground. Only way to get to them is to take out the places where they were under which they got to the tunnels. And so that's the first time I had the discussion about bombing civilian areas was when I went over after the 9/11, after the massacre that occurred.
So on that first trip, 10, 11 days after October 7th, you already raised the issues of how to get to a ceasefire.
Well, not a ceasefire, how to prevent innocent death.
Yes.
And then I pushed really, really hard for more humanitarian aid to go in.
When I studied history at university, they taught us how to approach source material like this from a particular time. And when you read back at the interventions of a political leader, whether it's a speech, an interview, something they wrote publicly or privately, what you're supposed to do is contextualize it. And that is not to simply take their words at face value, but to understand the purpose and real meaning. In this case, why is Joe Biden, the 46th president of the United States, on the very eve of his presidency ending, publicly declaring that he had told the leader of a foreign state he has armed to the teeth for 15 months to stop carpet bombing civilians at the beginning of what was and has been an incessant genocidal onslaught? And the answer is, Biden thinks this will help his place in history. He knows history is set to return a damning indictment of his time in the White House. One poll for PBS News finds that over a third of Americans believe he will go down in the history books as one of the worst presidents ever, compared to 5% who say one of the best. That places him right down at the bottom of the league of US presidents, just above Richard Nixon and below George W. Bush. He thinks this clip will lead historians to believe that he actually did remonstrate with Benjamin Netanyahu. He did implore him to stop unleashing barbaric, indiscriminate firepower against the innocent people of Gaza. Well, this clip is damning. It is, in actual fact, a confession. If Joe Biden ever ends up, or if he did end up at the International Criminal Court, this clip alone would be sufficient to find him guilty of complicity in grave war crimes, because it proves what should be obvious, that Joe Biden knew exactly what the Israeli state was doing from the very beginning. Now, Israel has been the biggest recipient of military aid of any foreign state in the post-war era, but since the 7th of October 2023, that surged to nearly $18 billion worth since then, which is obviously a vast sum of money. The US sent thousands, for example, of £2,000 bombs to Israel since October 7th, despite knowing full well that they were slaughtering civilians en masse. The New York Times, which has had a dire record of reporting this horror, made clear in December 2023 that Israel was dropping £2,000 bombs on areas that Israel told civilians to flee to. In October 2024, a Harvard study found that between the 7th of October and the 17th of November 2023, that is in the first 41 days, the Israeli military dropped nearly 600 £2,000 bombs with the capacity to damage hospital infrastructure or kill or damage injury hundreds of meters away, and 1/3 of those bombs identified were within dangerous proximity of hospitals across Gaza. Biden knows that the entire healthcare system of Gaza has been destroyed, essentially. Most hospitals have been violently put out of operation, some of them just reduced to rubble, not least Al-Shifa Hospital, which was the flagship hospital. They've killed over 1,000 medics. He knows all this in his more sentient moments. Whilst in a recent study, for example, the NGO Air Wars published 606 incidents of civilian harm reported in the first 3 weeks of the onslaught. So Israel was in the midst of doing that when he said this. That was halfway through that first 3 weeks that Air Wars looked at. I mean, obviously that onslaught carried on. I'm just talking about this particular time frame Air Wars was talking about. They found in that time frame a minimum of 5,319 civilians were killed by the aerial onslaught in the first 3 weeks, concluding by almost every metric the harm to civilians from the first month of the Israeli campaign in Gaza is incomparable with any 21st century air campaign. It is by far the most intense, destructive and fatal conflict for civilians that Air Wars has ever documented. Now, this is what academics and journalists uncovered. The US security services, bear in mind, have vastly more resources to know what their ally is doing. And we can hear from this clip, which should always be obvious, Biden knew exactly what was happening. And he kept arming what are, under international law, grave war crimes. I just want to take on the comparison he brings up here that Netanyahu apparently spoke about, which you hear a lot from Israel's cheerleaders. The comparison with World War II. It is so disgusting, so offensive. At the outset, comparing the primitive, unguided bombs of that era with what is supposed to be one of the most technologically sophisticated militaries on earth is outrageous. Then there is the fact that the Axis powers, that is Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan and so on, directly caused 85% of all the deaths of World War II. It's not like this idea, you keep coming up, it's like, well, look at all this, we were killing mass slaughter of civilians. The vast majority of people slaughtered violently were by the Axis powers, not by the Allies. And I just want to add this as well. Let's be clear, World War II was a righteous, just war against fascist barbarism waged by the likes of Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union. But actually, the Allies did commit war crimes. Just be very clear about this. The firebombing of Dresden, for example, that was a grave war crime, served no military purpose, and was seen as such by people at the time, I might add. And out of World War II, we had something called the Geneva Conventions. I don't quite understand why Joe Biden's talking about the United Nations in that context, the Geneva Conventions, which criminalised some of the things the Allies had done. But all of that aside, Nazi Germany was a military superpower, which was conquering the whole of the European continent, waging a war of annihilation on the Eastern Front, committing multiple genocides, of course the Shoah, the extermination of 6 million Jews, other genocides as well, and they had a genuine shot at world domination. The whole world dominated by Nazi Germany and its hideous allies. Gaza is a tiny slither of land no bigger than East London, which, before all of this, was legally defined as being under occupation as per the United Nations, under the longest siege of our time, mostly made up of a refugee population, indeed, mostly the families of people who'd been violently ethnically cleansed in 1948, people driven out of their homes, as is, not a military superpower conquering the world. Frankly, a small ragtag militant force. Not to say, by the way, that terrible war crimes weren't committed on 7th October. I've always been clear about that. I've always had more consistency on this one, unlike my critics. Clearly, the context of decades of brutal occupation, ethnic cleansing, siege, mass slaughters of Palestinians, colonisation, so on, stripped away. The point is, there is no comparison. What Netanyahu said there to justify unleashing several times worth the firepower of Hiroshima on a strip of land no bigger than East London is disgusting, as you'd expect from one of the great monsters of our time. And as for that point about pushing, Biden says pushing for humanitarian aid to get in. How did that go? How did that go then, buddy boy? What did you do about it? Nothing. Nothing. Two of your own government agencies concluded by April, so months after this pointless conversation you apparently had, that Israel had deliberately blocked humanitarian aid and was deliberately blocking humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza. Guess what? By the US's own laws that then compelled the US to stop sending Israel arms. Guess what the US did? Broke its own laws, carrying on handing Israel a load of weapons. But he did have that private conversation about humanitarian aid, so who's to say that that was meaningless? Now, all the way through this horror, Joe Biden has occasionally done his hand-wringing act, and it serves one purpose and one purpose alone, and that is to try and deflect pressure, both domestically from people who aren't, let's say, that inclined favourably towards murdering huge numbers of people, as well as internationally, because lots of people around the world and foreign governments, quite understandably, think this is disgusting. So he had to do this act. 12th of December 2023. He warned Israel risked losing support over what he said was indiscriminate bombing in Gaza. What did he do? He carried on giving Israel weapons. Then, 12th of February 2024, Joe Biden apparently vented his frustration in multiple private conversations about his inability to persuade Israel to change its military tactics, and he said he was trying to get a ceasefire, but Netanyahu was giving him hell, was impossible to deal with, he was the obstacle. What did he do? He carried on giving Israel weapons. In March 2024, Joe Biden warned publicly an onslaught by Israel against Rafah was a red line Israel must not cross. Israel crossed it. What did he do? Carried on giving Israel weapons. Sorry, I don't want to be entirely unfair. Apparently, he did call Netanyahu an effing liar privately. 3rd of April 2024, when Israel killed some white Westerners by killing 7 World Central Kitchen workers. One of them was Palestinians, but clearly the fact some white Westerners were killed was a bit too much for even some in the Western media and Western politicians. So what happened then? Joe Biden said he was outraged at Israel. What did he do? He carried on giving Israel weapons, didn't he? 10th of April 2024, Biden said Netanyahu's handling of the onslaught against Gaza was a mistake and said, I don't agree with his approach. Sounded like he was some sort of detached commentator, rather than the guy running a superpower facilitating the whole bloodbath. What did he do? He carried on giving Israel weapons. 28th of May 2024, he said there is every reason for people to draw the conclusion that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. What did he do? Carried on giving Israel weapons. I could go on. Joe Biden knows that Israel has committed multiple unspeakable war crimes in what is a genocidal onslaught. He's known that all the way through. He knows. He's not stupid. He might not be entirely with it, but he knows what they did. He has the most sophisticated intelligence agencies on Earth. He is one phone call away, pretty much from any expert on Earth he wants to talk to. He knew, and he facilitated everything. He's a war criminal. he belongs in jail. At the very least, we must make sure he's remembered for what he is, and that's a monster. Please like and subscribe, leave your thoughts, leave your comments, help us expand the operations. I've hired, I keep saying, a brilliant social media video person, so we're doing more Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook. Going to build that up. We need to reach more people. In the age of Trump and the rise of fascism, obviously what we're going to try and do, work with others, is to have content to fight the coming darkness. Don't want to be depressing. We're not going to be depressing now. I'm going to use this platform to promote alternatives. There's always hope. Always remember that. There's always hope. Listen to the podcast. You'll see things getting slicker and better, but still, obviously, my personal relationship with you, so to speak.